Hello. And welcome.
I'm sorry, this jingle is ridiculous. Can make it a bit shorter, perhaps.
Hello and welcome to History Revision with me, Will, and Connor Durkin. Love it.
Anticlimax much.
Okay. Today we're doing a bit of Tsarist Russia.
Big fun.
Part 1.
Comrades.
We're going to try and do the entire spec over this small series of
Audio
podcasts.
files.
We're going to kick off. Tsarist Russia, the AQA spec, starts in 1855 and ends in 1917 with the revolution. It's split into 5 categories: reform and reaction, 1855 to 1881; political reaction, social and economic change, 1881 to 1904; Russian Revolution, 1904 to 1906; the Tsarist regime, 1906 to 1914; and the First World War and the Revolution of 1917. Today we are going to be doing the first section, which is reforms and reaction. I'm going to head to our historian, Connor Durkin.
Right, I'm just going to give you a quick background into into what Tsarist Russia was like in the mid-19th century. It was a large but economically undeveloped empire with a ratio of about 11 to 1 village to town dwellers. Fairly, backwards sort of medieval peasantry type thing. 85% of the population were illiterate and were peasants, so they couldn't read, write, and had no formal education. Most serfs, which were named for these peasants, belonged to village communes or mirs. Obviously, the Mir space station, bit of science in here, obviously named community, blah blah blah, nobody cares. Where the village elders regulated their primitive strip farming, giggity. They paid their master for the land in rent or labour and could be bought, sold, and beaten by him. Masters usually the nobility. Ruling over Imperial Russia was an autocratic Tsar. Autocratic means that he decides what goes. He has complete and total control
The opposite
over
of
everything.
democracy.
Yeah. Who was also the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. He was believed to possess semi-divine powers, so in medieval England they had the divine right to rule. His edicts, or ukase, were law, and he could choose his own advisors.
Yeah. There we go. Introduction there from Connor Durkin for what Russia was like in 1855. The Crimean War, I believe, was going on. The Crimean War was going on in 1855 as Alexander II comes to the throne. Good thing, would you say, Connor?
The Crimean War had a really bad influence on Russia as a whole because Russia was effectively humiliated by Britain and France.
Basically, yeah, exactly.
Fighting over the remnants of the Ottoman Empire. So, and after this humiliating defeat, they were forced to withdraw all military presence from anywhere near the Crimea, and Russian
Which
ships
was
weren't
part
allowed in the
of
Black Sea.
Russia.
Yeah, it was effectively part of Russia.
The point is that the Crimean War shows that there needs to be change in Russia, and the fact that this new Tsar, Alexander II, comes to the throne after his dad died, that's Nicholas I. And but the fact is that the war just, he's just in the throne, new Tsar, then the war is lost.
Yeah.
Which isn't a good reputation. It makes him look rubbish.
And
even though it wasn't really his fault because he couldn't really do anything about it. He's in the middle of a war, with taking on superpowers that are just better than him, and it's showing that Russia, which everyone in the world thinks that it's such a great company, it shows that they're rubbish. They've got rubbish weapons. They've got rubbish
Tactics,
communications.
yeah.
They've got the people in the army are serfs mainly.
Conscripted.
No, they're subsidised for their master and nobility who own them because they're just virtual slaves. They're subsidised for them. They said, you've got to go to the army. He said, okay, I'll send 2 serfs instead. They can't tell the left foot from the right foot. They're divs of the highest order. And there needs to be change, which is why Alexander is also known as the Great Liberator, Great Reformer.
Yep, because he saw the problems at the heart of the Russian country is that, farming was completely backwards. There was little or no
Agriculture was
productivity.
poor. Because what is the point? I mean, you have say the nobility owns the majority of the land. There are a few free peasants and the crown land, but then you have serfs. They're owned by the nobility, and they're running the land. It's not theirs. They don't benefit if they work hard enough. So you do the minimum that you can get away with, and that's not productive. Especially in Russia, which is hardly one of the most helpful regions. It's so cold and barren. Most of the land
Siberia is huge, vast nothingness. In fact, there's an example that a meteor hit in the Siberian forest, leveled trees for 100, like I think it was 100 meters around, and caused this massive explosion. And no one heard it because Siberia is so vast that no one was within 200 miles to hear it.
Exactly. There we are. Prime example. I don't know if you can write that in your thing. So of all the facts, that's one that you should forget, but you'll probably remember that more than anyone else. You'll be sat in the exam going, right, okay, Siberia, what the meteor, but that's not helpful.
Let's say, was it Russia covered a sixth of the landmass of the world?
Yeah.
Right.
Sixth landmass.
Remember that.
So the Crimean War. So, we said that it doubts the great power, it shows their backwardness, it shows the need for military reform and highlights the need for change, in that the need for changes, especially with serfdom, and there are problems in serfdom. And his father, Nicholas I, was considering emancipating serfdom, and Alexander turned to the people, his peeps, in what year? 1855. He comes in, Alexander II, and asks the nobility, make plans to release your serfs. And it took till 1859. The nobility hadn't done anything. So the Tsar goes, no, really, do something, or I'm going to do something. And in 1861, he did it himself and released them.
However,
serfs emancipated.
Serfs were given freedom. They were given freedom to marry who they chose. They were given the freedom to move away from their little communities. But there were a number of terms that most people felt were unsatisfactory.
Exactly, yeah.
So
Main one.
Redemption payments.
Like redemption payments. Basically, you're free, but you now have to pay me for the next 49 years for a tiny scrap of land which is practically useless.
And less than what you had before.
Yeah, and it's just not worth it. It's not worth it at all. And it is less than you had before. And they were thinking that, is it really worth it? Because we had a better life before. Now, if we have a poor crop, we can't get food from our masters if they're good to us. We just have to starve and die.
Yeah.
So it's not, there are definitely negatives to the emancipation in their eyes. But one important thing to note is they did not blame the Tsar. They saw him as literally God on earth.
Yeah.
The serfs and the majority of the peasants all the way until 1905, they see him as this literally a holy person, and they blame the nobility, and there is unrest.
Who in themselves were dissatisfied because they were given payments that were unsatisfactory to what they lost.
Mm-hmm. Now, one good stat is there was more unrest in the 6 months after emancipation than there was before. I believe is a good one. I'm going to keep looking at you every time I say a fact because I doubt myself.
No, you're getting it right. It's fine.
Okay, all right. I'm
Good,
sorry.
good.
All right. Dad, it's all right, son. You're getting there.
Why is that one after? No, never mind.
Right. Yeah. We'll touch on that later. We're doing the emancipation first. So the emancipation. So reasons for emancipation. Agriculture is underproductive is the main point. Then you've got the Crimean War. There needs to be a military reform. You're paying. I can't remember what the expenditure was.
And it was also I can't remember, but it was something like I think it was 90% of Russia's economy was expended on the military. A very large proportion.
Yeah, it was something like
extortion.
That. It was a large amount. Yeah.
The Crimea also sort of highlighted the fact that industrial countries like Germany and France and Britain, well, mostly France and Britain really, they were much better at producing sophisticated weaponry. So Alexander II really, really did want to push for industrial reform as well. So he also, the idea behind serfdom is to not just to make them free and have agricultural stimulation, but also he wanted to sort of create, I think the term is a mobile workforce, so they could move to the cities and start, working in the factories and producing cheap goods.
Yeah. But the obviously problems with it. So to sum up very quickly, agriculture underproductive. They need to industrialise. They need military reform. The main points, pretty much. Yeah, you can explain, etc. In practice, they were tied to the Mir still, so they couldn't really go and industrialise because they were still tied to the land. If you like, they could have moved away, but it was hard and a bit awkward and not really socially accepted, I'd say.
Yeah. And the peasants were a very sort of conservative bunch anyway, so no one really wanted to embrace this change.
And they're not that clever.
Yeah.
To be fair, so. And they don't really like change, and they've already got enough change. They don't want to move completely.
Yeah.
Other practices, unrest, as I said, afterwards, and just generally it brings in more problems because once you've emancipated them, you've got serfs. You open a whole another kettle of fish.
Yeah.
I believe
Yeah.
is a term.
Very good.
And so that's the emancipation. Now, it's reforms, because Alexander now has to reform. In particular, the main reforms he did is the Zemstva, which are local government reform,
Zemstva.
censorship reform, military reform, and any more reforms?
That's pretty much it, actually. There was a bit of educational just shoved in there.
Education reform, yeah, right. Do you care to go through them, Connor?
Well, they also shoved in some judicial reforms in there as well. So judges and juries are introduced nationally. So trial by jury is a very modern thing at this time. And judges were appointed for life. They couldn't be removed. And they're also very well paid after this reform. So sort of stop bribery attempts. We also have the relaxation of censorship in 1863. So publications/prosecutions can only be censored after publication, unlike before when they could be censored before they were even printed.
Mm-hmm.
This is largely because there is a need for new ideas to enter the country, and another way of doing this is by relaxing the restrictions on university study. This is education coming in here. They need people to study, move the country forward, but you can't control what they think about. That's what the...
One nice quote is, once you let the air in, you can't control what comes with it.
Indeed.
So as soon as they start relaxing censorship and relaxing what they learn at university, you cannot control what they then don't censor or what they then learn. And so, yeah, that's one problem. And censorship was that in 1863?
1863, yes.
And in 1865, the press are allowed to discuss government policy. Another good fact.
So critical thinking of the government's actions. And we also have this education reform, just linking in with the relaxation of censorship, as well as the relaxation towards universities. Primary and secondary education were extended, and class bias was lessened. However, this sort of led to an increase in people who are critically thinking about the governments and people who are discovering liberal ideas or even Marxist ideas, which we'll come on to later.
Local government reform, the Zemstva, at local level there was a complete government vacuum because you just got rid of the nobility who governed their serfs. Before, if two serfs had been fighting, their master would have solved it. Now they're free, there is no one to enforce anything, so there needs to be local government systems to look after the peasants. So local officials need to be appointed, but there is no money to pay for them, so there must be volunteers. They decided to select local people through election to be part of the Zemstva. But this creates a paradox, because the Tsar believes in no parliament, autocracy, the opposite of democracy. So he's running on autocracy, but he's just introduced an elected council, and which makes people ask, why can't there be a national Zemstva? In 1864, when the Zemstva was set up, people asked why there wasn't a national one. And that, together with the judiciary reform, shows that independent centres of power from the Tsar have been created, which is arguably not a good thing. Political parties are still illegal, though, and if you form one, you will be arrested. So there's many...
As are trade unions. Just the last one, military reform here. The plan was, the Russian army was vast, but it was very poorly trained, very poorly equipped, and consisted largely of peasants.
This is in 1864.
Indeed. So their plan was to sort of thin out the army to a small, highly efficient and better trained army. And they also wanted a lot of reserves that would be in civilian jobs but could be called up at any one time just in case they went to war. And also punishment, when people, before these reforms, often people who were, say, called murder or assault, they would often be placed in the army as a punishment. They would have to serve time in the army as part of their ordeal. But this was banned, and then the service, which is how long you sign up for, was reduced vastly from 25 years in the army down to 6 and then 9 in a civilian job. So at the end of these results, the class bias, which is sort of more peasants than officers, so it's discriminate, rather, was still present in the army, but better training and better equipment made the army a much more efficient fighting machine.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Why did Alexander II win France? And you can get questions on sort of motives for reform, whether reforms were successful, why were people to satisfaction. A big point that people tend to bring up is that there was loads of dissatisfaction about the reforms. Loads of it. The Liberals said it did not go far enough. That you should have gone further. You stopped. Why did you stop? The point that everyone forgets, and that if you remember, then you will get an A, is just simply because it wasn't meant to do that. The point of these reforms have got nothing to do with helping people particularly. Not really helping. The only person it was helping was the person that made it, which was the Tsar. They were to strengthen the autocracy and improve support and admittedly make Russia great again. But, you know, he doesn't want to cut off the hand that feeds him, as they say. So the reason that they were limited is because they were meant to be limited, because
Yeah.
they weren't meant to offer anything. The only people that are moaning are the people that want complete change and national semester. And the reason he won't get that because they weren't meant to be, so there's no point. With emancipation, they gained their own land and their freedom, and they became citizens of Russia. And obligations to the former masters fade out, and they can now change their conditions by leaving. And they did lose their support of the master economically, livestock, materials. They are now obliged to pay market prices, and then the redemption payments, then the arrears in payments occur, which is the how you pay it back,
Yeah.
like on a monthly basis, etc. And they got
direct
behind
debit.
because they couldn't afford it. And then the average peasant family farmed less than they did before, and the poorest land to farm with more mouths to feed. But you didn't really have an option because your nobility is the only people that are really supporting you as a czar, like politically, because the serfs and the peasants may like you, but they're not having any effect politically because they don't vote for you and they don't accept. So your main supporters are the nobility, so you can't really screw them over, and you do screw them over slightly, but
Royally.
to an extent, you
The general consensus of
and
these
try and limit it.
reforms.
So try and keep everyone happy.
The general consensus about these reforms is that they weren't fantastically successful. They did offer some freedoms, but the terms and the sort of small print of them really annoyed many people.
Yeah, but
Dissatisfaction.
the point is that they did their job. They strengthened the autocracy.
Fair
This
enough.
was the majority of the reforms were in the 1860s, and in 1917, that was when the autocracy fell, and arguably it was because of the Tsar on at the time, and or arguably because of the war. But that is still a good 40, 50 years extra when the state after the Crimean War in 1855 is that
Could have led to
Russia
a
is
collapse, fair
going
enough.
into a pool. So we're not going to do opposition yet. The impacts of Alexander's reform on society. We've kind of touched on that already, I think, haven't we? We touched on that.
I
The
believe so.
impacts on society.
Yeah.
Yeah. That leaves the extent of reaction for 1881. Can you explain what happened in 1881?
1881 was, as you all should know, the assassination of Alexander II. This revolutionary group called the People's Will attacked, and he's had, I think, several attempts on his life before, especially in the 1860s, and he's sort of withdrawn some of his reforms by now. So this revolutionary group, the People's Will, actually did assassinate him, and the only reason he was killed, well, funnily enough, we always think of the Tsar as this unhelpful character who wouldn't really help anyone else. They actually got out to see a bomb was thrown at his carriage. He wasn't killed, he was lightly injured, and he actually got out to see how well his men were, see if he could help, and another bomb was thrown at him and he died. And he died I think it was a few days later with his family at a palace. And then this sort of boosted support of the revolutionaries, and also sort of people thought that change might finally be coming, that they might get more freedoms. However...
But it was just replaced by his son.
Yeah, exactly.
But some more reactions to the reforms and reactions to the new Tsar. In 1863, there was the revolt in Poland. Well, the problem with that, the problem with letting the Polish go is that 50% at the time, 50% of the population of Russia weren't Russian.
Yeah.
So, if you were to let the Polish go,
Other minority groups might start
then it
claiming...
all follow. You'd lose
Yeah.
half of your population. You'd just fall into a hole. Basically.
They've also got some personal reasons. I mean, Alexander II's wife, I think, contracted tuberculosis, and his son died.
Yeah.
So he started retracting these reforms, put
In
in charge.
1865,
Yeah, put in charge some ministers who started they're very conservative and started getting rid of some of these freedoms.
There was in 1866 the first attempted assassination on the Tsar. He was out, and someone came out of the crowd, I believe, and tried to kill him, but he was taken away. So, arguably, it had mixed views because many people did appreciate that he had made these reforms, and they did make people's lives better, and they did improve Russian society to
To a certain extent.
to a certain extent, because there wasn't any major revolution like there was in the 1900s. But then, by his by his death in 1881, it seems that I don't really want to touch on the next topic because we're doing that next time, but it seems that he Alexander III learnt his lesson. He said, "Well, look, reforms have been made, done everything you wanted, and you killed my father, Alexander II. So the result is that a period of no reforms and just repression."
And I will also point out that on the day of Alexander I's assassination, or Alexander II's assassination, he was actually carrying documents entailing a constitutional monarchy, which means that the Tsar has his powers reduced, and then sort of gives more power to the people. So on the day he was being assassinated, he was carrying this document of freedom almost.
Exactly. And another thing is the reaction to his assassination itself is quite significant, because most people, people's world turned around and went, "Look, we just killed him. Everyone, have a party." And everyone turned around and went, "Oh, what have you done?"
You idiot.
And basically, there was no support for them. They got arrested, they went to prison, and no one really liked them. And everyone was like, "Well, why did you do that?" Which shows that to an extent, actually, people were actually quite liking the Tsar, because not in love with them, not great, but as much as any politician nowadays, you
was
can
trying
manage
his
with them.
best.
Exactly. So he's quite capable. So that is the extent of reaction, really. One other thing that you could be touched on is the liberals, because they tend to bring them up a lot.
Yes.
Alexander himself was quite a liberal, because he had quite a liberal upbringing, and naturally is inclined towards social reform. And it's like I'm reading this. And the liberals themselves, the liberals' definition, Carne, could you say a definition of liberal?
I know it's left wing. No, they want
Somebody wants change, basically. People want
social change through democracy and through government. They don't want to sort of destroy the system. They want to work with it and improve it for personal freedoms and
which
legal freedoms.
Contrast with conservatives, which are like Alexander III and Nicholas II, which are everything should be the same, keep everything the same.
Yeah.
Continuity as it always has been, as it was my father and his father and his father. And that's the main clash, and that's the clash in the court of the Tsar, which is basically their home where they live. They've got different people talking in their ears all the time.
Yeah. Well.
And so that's it for this first topic. Second topic, political reaction, next time. I've been Will.
I've been Connor.
Thank you very much.
Stop.
This is awkward.
Recording.
Shut
Stop
up.
it.
Shut up.
Ah!